All-Star voting is open. Is Shōta Imanaga going to be the Cubs' only representative this year at the All-Star game? We're going to talk about that. Cubs start a series today in Tampa Bay, and Luis Vasquez is in town. Does that mean a move is coming? We're going to get into that and more on the Cubs baseball channel. Make sure to like and subscribe. Jump in the comments section. Let us know how you're feeling about this team as they start a series against the Tampa Bay Rays today. And here is your invitation to our show. What do you say, everybody? Welcome to the Cubs baseball channel. My name is Anthony Pasquale with Mick Gillespie. He's on Twitter at Broadcaster Mick, and I'm at Ant_Pasquale3. Thank you guys for joining us today as we talk some Cubs. Hope you enjoyed the off day. Mick, how was your off day?
Yeah, it's always great. I mean, more of a travel day for me, but you know what? Anytime that you get a chance to just kind of catch your breath during the course of the season's a good day.
Yeah, I got to be honest. It was kind of nice to take a break from this team because watching them has taken so much out of you over the last couple of weeks. But hopefully things start to get better soon. Let's get into the All-Stars because the voting is now open. Obviously, you can't vote for pitchers, but it seems like a foregone conclusion that Shōta Imanaga is going to represent the Cubs in the All-Star game, potentially even get some consideration to be the starter, which hasn't happened for the Cubs since I think the 1950s. Claude Passeau, there was a good story about him last year, growing up in the same town as Justin Steele, and he had an opportunity last year, but National League's been loaded with some pitchers. Tyler Glass now has been great, among some other guys. But aside from Shōta Imanaga, you think there's anybody else?
Yeah, Justin played on a field named after him, back in the day. I don't know. I mean, who's the other player you would put in that category? I mean, it's not your catchers, it's not first base.
Right.
Nico's been injured. I mean, it's not going to be him. Dansby hasn't put up the numbers this year. He's been injured. Morel's, kind of hobbled around. It's not going to be him. You look in the outfield, it's not going to be Hap. Bellinger, I mean, possibly, but I mean, I still think he's a long shot. And then Seiya Suzuki, no. I mean, could it be?
Could Assad go?
Well, I mean, I'm just saying, like, position players wise,
right?
Tachman. I mean, I don't really think any of those guys, but you're right. Assad.
Yeah, Leiter Jr. could be a candidate if they take a middle setup type of guy.
Yeah, right. And Seiya. I mean, like, and I'm sorry, and Shōta. So it's like you got three guys there that you feel pretty comfortable with.
Right.
Middle relievers don't always get the love that they deserve, but Javier Assad and Imanaga to me are like easy. They're easy.
Those are your top two, I'd say. I will say the National League outfield as a whole this year has been kind of weak. Mookie Betts has moved to shortstop. Bryce Harper has moved to first base. Juan Soto is now in the American League. So those are the three guys that you kind of were penciling in year after year: Betts, Harper, and Soto, and none of those guys are in the mix anymore. So I think Bellinger does have a fighting chance if he has a strong month of June. The Cubs fans aren't going to like it, but Christian Yelich probably has a good chance if he keeps up the numbers he's been looking at. Teoscar Hernandez looks like a shoe-in. He's been unbelievable for the Dodgers. But aside from that, there's not a ton of outfielders that are having great years. So maybe Bellinger can squeak in, but it seems like Imanaga is the only for sure at this point.
Yeah. And I would put Assad in that mix, but you're right. I mean, and that's sad because that tells you where the Cubs are right now. When you have a winning team, when your team is threatening to get to the World Series, you got a lot of guys that are going to be all-stars. I mean, let's think about 2016, the whole infield, entire infield, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and then you had Jake Arrieta and
Fowler too.
Yeah, and Fowler and whoever else. I mean, like there's guys that were that close. Some guys just didn't want to do it, but you had contenders. The
Mhm.
problem with this Cubs team is it's hard to find contenders amongst the position players. And that's sad, because you've got the big name guys and they're not producing.
Yeah, remember last year, Cody Bellinger didn't get hot until after the All-Star break, so he didn't go. The Cubs' 2 representatives, or I guess 3, but 1 chose not to go. Dansby Swanson, Justin Steele, and Marcus Stroman. So those were who represented you last year. Stroman's obviously in New York. Swanson has struggled, and Steele battled some injuries. So you think those 2 guys obviously won't make it. But we'll see. Maybe a big month of June from any of those outfielders could put them with a fighting chance. But let's talk about this. It was shown on Luis Vasquez's Instagram story last night that he is in just outside of Tampa Bay, St. Petersburg, Florida, which is, of course, where the Cubs are staying for this series against Tampa Bay. Could this be the Cubs bringing him up to the big leagues and putting Nico Hoerner on the injured list? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be because, the bottom line is that he's got like a fractured hand.
Right.
And this is the second time that he's been hurt, and we don't know if he's going to play or he's not going to play. Look, I get it. The guy's tough. He wants to be out there helping his team, and I appreciate that. That's a great thing. But the problem with this is that you still got to go out there and have guys that can play tonight. The Cubs can't afford to let any more games fall through the cracks. I mean, they've got to start winning baseball games, and they've got to start winning it soon, because the further you get away from 500, the further you get away from making the playoffs. Last time Vasquez got called up too late. They should have called him up earlier than they did. Then he gets up there and we don't even see him play. Now, is he, the next Derek Jeter? I mean, is he Sean Dunston? And no, I mean, but you know what? At least he can go out there and play healthy,
Yeah.
getting at bat, and I mean, that's not what Nico's able to do right now. So let's
Right.
get somebody
And
that can play.
when Vasquez was up, he did not get any starts. He only had 1 at bat and came in as a pinch runner once. So you still don't know anything about how this guy can play at the big league level. So it's exciting to potentially give him an option and hopefully let him get some starts at second base, because I don't think the Cubs have been all too impressed with David Bodie so far. Miles Mastrobuoni is obviously in AAA, and Nick Madrigal is going to be injured for quite some time with the broken hand. So if Hoerner is also on the shelf for some time, you need somebody to step up at second. Obviously, Michael Busch got to start the other day. Maybe against a righty, you see some of that. But if it's a lefty and you're choosing between Vasquez and Bodie, I'd like to see Vasquez in there.
Well, Vasquez can play better defense than all of them. And the Cubs have a real issue right now defensively.
Right.
When you bring two, and I know some of you guys are going to argue with me on this, but when you bring 2 corner infielders up and put them in spots that they're, trying to figure out on the job, it's going to take time. And then, and let's be honest. I mean, Dansby's not having the year that he had a season ago defensively. Nico's been pretty consistent, but it's not what he did last year. There's a rhythm that goes with playing great defense that this team doesn't have. Luis Vasquez can come up there and make a difference. And I predicted, years ago that he'd be a Gold Glover. I still think that. I'm going to stand by that. I think that he could potentially be a Gold Glover, probably not this year, but eventually in the big leagues. And I think that he's a guy that can help the Cubs. And look, he's on the 40-man roster. That's what you put him on there for. And this team needs a spark. Maybe he can do that. I don't know what he'll hit. I've seen the guy get hot before and drive some runs in and do some things with the bat. But it's always been his defense that's kind of stood out to me more than anything.
Yeah, and maybe by the time you guys are listening to this, you'll get the official word that he's coming back up. If any of you are thinking like, oh, maybe the AAA team is playing in Florida, no, they're in Columbus. So he's in Florida for a reason.
Yeah.
And we'll see what the official move is, probably sooner rather than later. But here's something I want to get into too. Willson Contreras is a guy that I brought up over the last couple of weeks, saying with Yan Gomes and Miguel Amaya both not giving you much behind the plate, what were the Cubs doing not extending Willson Contreras for a long period of time? Now, we know he wasn't a great defender, but he had a rocket for an arm, and the Cubs have had such trouble keeping runners off the base paths and out of the steal bases column. But with Willson Contreras, the bat was always there, and it's something that the Cubs would love to have in the middle of their lineup. But according to David Kaplan on ESPN 1000, the Cubs partially parted ways with Willson Contreras because he was a hothead.
Yeah, and look, I love Cap. You guys know that. I mean, he's been on the channel before. I've known him for a long time. He's got great sources. If he says it, there's a reason why. I knew that Willson Contreras is definitely a fiery guy.
Mhm.
I was telling the story a couple of days ago about him as, I think, like a 19-year-old. Like, basically, there was like a play at the plate, and he punched the guy in the face after the play, like literally punched him in the face.
The Michael Barrett move.
Yeah, but I mean, as like a ball Cubs guy. But you know what? Like, he got to the big leagues, and the Cubs needed him in the World Series. I still think they should have signed him. I thought that at the time. It's just a
Mhm.
position where there's not a lot of
Yeah.
availability out there. And I was really surprised and stuff like that, or why David Bodie got buried in the minor leagues. You wonder, like, what's the behind the scenes story? And if you're, going around smashing iPads and acting like a baby, then the team probably wouldn't want you around. I mean, that
Right.
makes sense. I never heard that before about him, but it does kind of. It's one of those stories that I'm sure somebody in the organization told David, because we've always wondered, why in the hell didn't
Yeah.
you sign him? And now
And
I guess that makes sense. Like, you can't deal with the pressure of playing baseball every day and you're breaking stuff. Okay, well, we'll find somebody that can't. But the Cubs, honestly, they have the worst catching duo in baseball right now. It'd be nice to
right.
have him, even though he's injured.
And that's probably why that story leaks, right? Everybody's saying, "Man, the Cubs catcher sucks so bad. Why didn't they keep the one that was good?"
That's
Well,
why.
because he's a terrible teammate and not a good clubhouse guy, especially as you try to shift gears into a younger pitching staff that needs the help from the catchers. They need somebody to lean on. Yan Gomes is that guy. It's just hurts getting next to nothing from him in the lineup. And we know as the Cubs season moves toward the trade deadline, catcher is going to be a place of need. And there's a few guys, the Rockies catcher, Elias Diaz. There's a catcher on the A's who they may be willing to part ways with at the deadline. And we'll keep you updated on that. But there's been first baseman news around the trade market swirling. The report came out a few days ago that the Cubs have had internal conversations about Vladimir Guerrero Jr. as a trade target this year at the deadline. He's not a free agent after this year. He would be after next season. So he would require a little bit of a bigger package. The other one, Pete Alonso, who John Heyman reported yesterday, is a more likely target for the Cubs at the trade deadline, just because he's a free agent to be and has really good success, not only in the National League, but specifically at Wrigley Field. So what do you make of this, Mick? And if you had to pick, who would you like?
Well, I mean, it's a tough question. I mean, I like Pete Alonso. I mean, it'd be great to have the polar bear. I like how fiery he is. I mean, and his home run derby antics are my favorite. Where he shows up and he's ready to win that. I say antics, but really competitiveness.
Yeah.
But I feel like Vlad would be just, man, he would be so big in a Cubs uniform. And then you get to have him next year. Cubs have some tough decisions to make. I know they're going to trade some top prospects in some of these deals. And I just keep saying to myself, like, you can't trade James Triantos. You cannot trade Owen Casey. And when they're making these deals, to me, I'm sure that they're internally saying the same thing, but the other teams are going, "Hey, that's who we want." Hey, give us,
Right.
we'll do this deal right now for Owen Casey. I mean, if you were Toronto,
Mm-hmm.
you bring Owen Casey in from that area, a
And he's
Canadian,
Canadian.
yeah, and he's a great player, and he's going to be a star. Why not, right? But I don't know. I mean, it's such a tough deal because this team needs some help. And they could definitely use a productive first baseman. Is that going to be a difference maker? They have so many other issues. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, but I'll tell you what, I just can't imagine them selling. So that puts me in a spot where I think they're going to buy. I think that if they don't make the playoffs this year, that there could be a shakeup in the front office.
Yeah.
And so I think that's extra motivation. So when these situations happen, it's always hard because you don't want your front office making deals based off of saving their
save
jobs.
job.
You know,
Yeah.
you want to make deals that where they feel comfortable and they're going to be around for a while. And look, Tom Ricketts has never been the type of guy that puts a lot of pressure on anybody. I mean, I've known him since he bought the team. He is a very mild mannered, very fair owner. I mean, plain and simple. Probably sometimes too fair, to be honest with you. For just my opinion. I mean, you know, George Steinbrenner was the owner of the Yankees, and he used to come down with the iron fist. And, you know, as much as some people didn't like that, the Yankees were always trying to do their best to win, you know, but when your management style is like, hey, I'm going to sit back and wait, you know, whether that's on the business side or on the, you know, on the player side, on the baseball side, you know, fans get frustrated, you know, so, but I believe in those guys. I love, you know, I believe in Tom Ricketts and I love the Cubs. You know, I hope that they do something to get this thing going because it would be such a disappointing year if they can't get it turned around. And this is the time, you know, when you're only a couple games out behind 500. Forget about the playoffs. You as long as you're around 500, you're gonna have a chance. So yeah, I would love to see either one of those guys in the right package. And I would think, you know, my opinion, I would think that you'd hate to give up guys like Matt Shaw or Kevin Alcantara. But those may be the names you have to give up to get this deal done. You know, Alexander Canario might be a name that you part with. Brennan Davis. I don't think I because of his injury issues, I don't know what his value is. But if you could trade him, I would definitely trade him too. And
Yeah,
that's the same reason. It's because of the injuries.
absolutely, and it's one of those things. Let me give quick numbers here. Pete Alonso, 14 homers this year. He's hitting 240. So the average is never going to be there with Pete, but he's got some of the best power in the league, especially against lefties. And Vlad Guerrero, his average is much better. He's hitting 292. Power's down a little bit, 7 homers, but he plays better defense than Alonso at first. Also plays a little bit of third, which is interesting because if you get a first baseman, DH type of player, it makes it a lot harder to get all 5 outfielders action that you're trying to with Happ and Suzuki, Bellinger, who now would no longer be able to play first. Then you got Talkman and Pete Armstrong. So it makes it interesting. If you could get Vlad and stick him at third and feel good about that, that could change the lineup immensely. But I want to ask you this too, because you have a good handle on the farm system. Let's call Pete Armstrong a part of it as well. Who are your untouchable guys? Like, there's no way I'm giving these guys up. Let's say 3 or 4 guys that you really don't want to part with.
Well, I mean, I'm not trading Pete. I'm not trading Owen Casey. I'm not trading James Triantos. And
then
I'm
Cade
not
Horton.
trading Cade Horton. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I'm keeping all those guys. And that doesn't mean that there's other really good players. Like I really like Matt Shaw, but you can't keep them all, you know? So if I've got to pick between one or the other,
those are your guys.
I really like James Triantos for a few reasons. And I can give you the breakdown on all of them. Triantos has bat to ball skills that you can't teach. It's just natural. And his feet are really good. He runs to the baseball. He makes the game look easy. He can steal bases. But the bat to ball ability for him, and it's not Nick Magical weak contact. I mean, he hits the ball, gets a ton of hits. You know, Pete Crow Armstrong, you guys have seen a taste of it. You know, the way that he runs, the way that he plays the outfield. I think he's only going to get better. I think Owen Casey's your right fielder of the future. And I think by next year, he'll be on the 40 man. And when Seiya gets hurt for the 8th time or whatever, he'll go out there and that'll be that. And then Seiya will be a DH. I just think it's a matter of time. And then Cade Horton is the Cubs' best pitching prospect that they've had in a long time, you know, so you don't want to give him up. There's other guys. This organization is one of the most stacked organizations in baseball. And if you're going to trade away those guys, and maybe you do it just because you can't develop everyone, you know, and you can help your big league team, but you got to make good trades. And I didn't feel like that at the deadline. DJ Hers is already in the big leagues. Like I told you guys last year, he's already a starter in the big leagues. Would have liked to have had him now. You could have used him as a starter or a reliever for a team that didn't make the playoffs last year and a guy that's now on the Reds.
Yeah, Candelario.
You know, and then obviously, I was never a Quas guy. I mean, I think if you're going to make these deals, that you either got to make the playoffs and make a run, or don't trade away guys that are going to help you in the future. But other teams know who you got. There's scouts at every single game watching,
Yeah.
so those guys know what's going on. So it's a tough decision to make. And I would not want to be in this spot for the Cubs, because I feel like they could make some trades that could really hurt the organization. And when you look at the Dodgers, they're an elite organization, but they always trade away the right guy and they always keep the right guy.
Yeah.
I didn't think Theo Epstein did that, and I hope that Jed Hoyer does.
Absolutely. I think for me, Matt Shaw is creeping a little bit closer toward that untouchable range, just because he's the only guy that has some type of hope to solve third base. And unless you're trading for a third baseman, I think Matt Shaw has to stay. But like you said, going to have to part with some guys that you don't want to part with if you want to make the big league team better. Speaking of the big league team, they're in Tampa Bay tonight, 5:50 Central Time. That's the starting first pitch. Jameson Taillon on the bump for the Cubs, 3-2 on the season with a 3.47 ERA. It's been really good this year. Has been giving up 3 runs or less in every start, except the last one against the White Sox, which we'll hope is an outlier. He's up against Zach Eflin, 3-4 on the year with a 4.14 ERA on Tampa. Interesting pitching matchup. 2 guys that are approaching over the hill, have some good years behind them. But we'll see who could be a little bit more vintage tonight.
It's isn't a must win, but it would be a nice win for the Cubs. You got to go out there and start winning games, and you got to get it figured out. And I know you're dealing with injuries and everything else, but it's time to get it figured out, because now all of a sudden you had all that padding you had. Remember, they were like closing in on like 10 games over. Now they're 2 games under. It's time to win ball games. And Tampa Bay is a tough place to win. It's probably, besides Oakland, the worst stadium in the league. Don't hit it too high.
Yeah.
but it's time. It's go time. It's just time. It's time to lock in and start figuring out how to win games.
Absolutely. And we'll see if the Cubs can do just that in Tampa Bay tonight. And Justin Steele's podcast, he said that's one of his favorite places to go, down to South Florida. So we'll see if it means good luck for the rest of the Cubs. But jump in that comment section, guys. Let us know who your untouchable prospects are, who you think, no matter what, the Cubs can't give up, because they are going to be stars in just a few years. And what would you trade to get a guy like Vlad Guerrero or Pete Alonso? Let us know that. But for Mick, I'm Ant. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the Cubs Baseball channel, hopefully talking about a Cubs W.